Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight we will be covering the recent sad wrestling biopic, The Iron Claw, and then the tragicomic life of some spies in Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But before all of that, Alistair, what else have you done in the last fortnight?
So I watched a new film on Netflix that was also big at the London Film Festival last year, which is The Kitchen. And this is directed by Daniel Kaluuya, who's an actor we've talked a lot about, and I believe this is the first film he's directed. He's co-directed it with Quibi Tavares, who's an architect and director. It's set in a dystopian future London where the last bit of social housing is under threat from gentrification, and police and things are kind of coming in trying to force the tenants out, but they're fighting back. And yeah, it's a good story about sort of community resistance, this group of people coming together to fight against the forces of gentrification and capitalist society. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting portrait of this quite sort of ragtag social housing estate where things aren't perfect, but like there's a sort of melting pot of different people and everyone has like a place there. So yeah, it's a sort of interesting dystopian film set in London, which is I guess unusual as we see so many films set in America.
Yeah, I know this isn't the first sci-fi fantasy housing film you've covered. Wasn't there one with Matt Smith a few years ago? So this is very much a subgenre of interest to you.
Yeah. No, I do like films about housing. So yeah, there was the one about the refugees who'd been housed in a haunted house after coming through the asylum system. Yeah, I think that also had Wumi Masala in it. Yeah, that was a good film. That was more of a horror film. There was also a film I don't think I discussed on the podcast, but there's a great movie called The Last Black Man in San Francisco, which is about housing in San Francisco. So that's another one as well. That film slightly let down with the fact it's got Jonathan Majors in it.
Well, they couldn't have known at the time.
No, it was the film that was made, I don't know, about 6-7 years ago. But yeah, I guess sort of housing films, is an interest of mine.
So where does this rate in the subgenre?
I think this is pretty high up there, actually. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting film. It's quite sort of un-Hollywood in that it's got a quite loose narrative structure. There's not a kind of ending that wraps it all up nicely. It's a bit ambiguous. The main character is this guy who works in this sort of funeral home and is sort of a bit cynical about things. And the plot is he meets this kid who's looking for his father, and it's never quite tells you whether he is the kid's father or not, or whether he's just sort of taking him under his wing in a sort of found family sort of way. But they managed to find some great dystopian locations around London. There's quite a lot shot at the Barbican. There's various bits. It kind of looks quite sci-fi, especially in the greenhouse there is used in quite a few scenes, as well as various social housing estates in South London are recognised. It's all a bit weird when you know a city so well and you see it chopped up and mashed together for a film, I guess, because you know where the actual places are.
Yeah, but not in a takes you out of it kind of way.
No, it's still very immersive, yeah. And the portrayal of this estate called The Kitchen is very, believable and things like that. And it's sort of set in the future. They've weaved in the sort of technology in like quite a subtle way how things are different. Like they have mirrors that kind of work as phones, so you can like phone people or have like your daily news on your bathroom mirror, things like that. And they've added a few bizarre new skyscrapers to the London skyline to go alongside like, the Shard and the walkie-talkie. There's one that's like a kind of a big circle, which I can imagine they'll build something like that in the future.
But it's not full-on robots in the streets.
No, it's not like that, yeah. It's not sort of ambiguous about when it's set, but there's lots of sort of hints towards the future. There's a lot of, like, police drones flying around and things. There's one bit when a group of kids assemble a catapult to knock this sort of police drone out of the sky, which is quite a good scene. Yeah, I strongly recommend it. One of the main characters is the sort of DJ on the Kitchen's got its own radio station who plays music and keeps the community spirits up when they're under attack. And he's a good returning character. But he's played by Ian Wright, the former footballer and largely a football commentator now, which was sort of slightly strange to see him crop up, but he's actually very good, so I was surprised by that, but yeah,
following in the footsteps of Vinnie Jones.
Yeah, exactly, and all those great footballers who've become great actors.
All those others
who I'm struggling to think of right now. I can only think of wrestlers who've become actors, but that's probably because we're about to discuss the Iron Claw. It's more of a pipeline, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't think football's quite as theatrical.
I get the sense there's quite a few American footballers who become actors, but I don't know the sport so well. The guy who played Teal'c in Stargate SG-1 was an American footballer, so yeah, there's an extra piece of trivia for you.
But at that point, we've gone some distance from the kitchen.
We have gone some distance from the kitchen, much as I am quite far from my kitchen right now. But
Sure.
yeah, there we go. Got to get a joke in there somewhere. But I would strongly recommend this film if you're a big fan of sci-fi, especially like British sci-fi. I mean, yeah, no one does a sort of gloomy dystopian film like the British do. I guess something between our weather and our national outlook. Yeah, sort of suits the dystopian genre. But yeah, it's on Netflix. Yeah, it's a really interesting film. Yeah, Daniel Kaluuya is a really interesting actor. He chooses a lot of good projects, and yeah, interesting this time he's decided to be behind the camera.
Yeah, so he's not actually on screen.
No. Yeah, he's just the kind of, I don't know, driving creative force behind it. But yeah, it's got, good cast, including quite a lot of young people playing, the sort of the plot line involving the young people on the estate. Yeah, so yeah, it's just if you're looking for something a bit different, yeah, check this out. Definitely something that's a bit un-Hollywood. It's got that kind of British stroke independent film thing of it's an ambiguous ending, but still like an interesting character journey. So yeah, and it's interesting to see kind of a sci-fi film doing that when they tend to be more Hollywood. Cool. Anyway, so I've been watching dystopian sci-fi on Netflix. Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, much as Alistair's very much in his pet genre, I've been reading a superhero comic. This is the current Poison Ivy series from DC Comics by G. Willow Wilson, best known, I guess, for creating or co-creating the Kamala Khan Ms. Marvel, and artist Marcio Takara, alongside a few villains and backup artists. And yeah, this is a series about, well, obviously the Batman villain Poison Ivy, who has been sort of slowly moving into more of a sort of semi-anti-hero role over the last few years. I guess it's partly connected to the fact that she's increasingly known in the public consciousness as Harley Quinn's girlfriend, mostly thanks to that cartoon, to be honest, which I'm not reviewing the cartoon, but I have seen the first 4 seasons, and it's also very good. So I can understand why that cartoon may have influenced the take on Poison Ivy. So that sort of made it into the comics, possibly combined with the fact that Poison Ivy's thing is obviously she's pro-plant, she's pro sort of the environment, and, that means she's increasingly, on the right side of culture to the mind of a lot of people nowadays. Poison Ivy as a sort of environmental terrorist is, I guess, as climate change becomes more and more of a thing, increasingly easy to write as somebody who has a valid point, actually. So in this, she's portrayed as being someone who does have a broadly valid point, even if she does sometimes go a bit extreme. Like in this comic, she's been infected with dangerous mushroom spores and is trying to, where she's going on a quest to both cure herself and on this sort of bucket list, doing everything she can before she dies adventure, just in case she doesn't cure herself. And yeah, there's a few cameos from Harley Quinn. There's a lot of her, like, infiltrating oil companies and stuff, and going on weird wellness retreats to prove that they're not actually environmentally friendly. And yeah, it's quite fun. It's quite silly and satirical, as the last comment may have made clear. And there's quite a bit of good sort of planty body horror when people get, like, I don't know, massively infected with plant spores and blow up full of green matter, that sort of thing. As I say, for a mainline, I think broadly intended as 12A DC comic, there's some decent plant body horror.
Yeah, I like the idea of Poison Ivy as an eco-warrior. Yeah, or sort of eco-terrorist, I suppose.
Yeah, as I say, the increasing prevalence of those issues makes it quite easy to write her that way, and I think there's effort being made by G. Willow Wilson to make it clear that this is still, a morally ambiguous figure. She does still do quite a few murders, but I think between the increasing mainstreamness of her cause and the fact that she's dating Harley Quinn, who is broadly sympathetic, she's never portrayed as quite, beyond saving or completely awful.
Yeah, I guess that's where it comes into being like an anti-hero, or in the sort of borderline between villain and anti-hero. Yeah, sort of morally ambiguous space.
Yeah, morally ambiguous anti-hero. Batman turns up at one point to give her a good threatening, but doesn't smack her in the face and take her to Arkham Asylum, which is nice of him. Yeah, it's mostly just a fun series of vignettes about Poison Ivy travelling through these different environments. The main villain of this, a villain you've actually encountered, is Jason Woodrue, the Floronic Man, who appeared in the Alan Moore Swamp Thing comic, which we read.
Yes, I do remember that, yeah. So yeah, that's another sort of piece of the chronology linking up.
Yeah, over the years he has become even more sort of grotesque and more plant than human. And he is sort of, I gather, I'm not actually an expert in Poison Ivy's backstory beyond what I've read in this comic, but it sounds like at some point they've interwoven Jason Woodrue and Poison Ivy's backstories so that, he was involved in the experiments that created her. So he's sort of coming back as this sort of part of her past who's gone even further with turning himself into a plant than Poison Ivy has.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I can see how they would link the two up as they both have that kind of common plant-based origin. So yeah, I can see how that would work as well. Yeah, and again, there's real potential for body horror there.
Yeah, it works well, and he's a pretty horrific figure, which again, when you're doing a comic about an anti-hero or a morally ambiguous character, obviously one of the ways to sell that is to bring in someone who's even more awful, who's, along similar lines, but much worse, which is a role he plays successfully here.
Yeah, see also Venom and Let There Be Carnage.
Yes, Venom and Carnage, obviously. Carnage very much a big part of the anti-hero rising of Venom.
Yeah. It's interesting to see that Poison Ivy's found a kind of new lease of life in popular culture. I think for quite a lot of people, probably people my age or older, the first version of Poison Ivy that comes to mind is the Uma Thurman one in that Batman and Robin film that kind of bombed in the late 90s. So I guess, but enough time has gone by that people have moved on beyond that. And there's a lot of people who probably fortunately are too young to remember that film.
Well, yeah, and I think, as I say, I think the popularity of the Harley Quinn cartoon has sort of helped create a new prevalent version in the sort of outside comics pop culture, which again is a good cartoon. It's annoyingly hard to get hold of in the UK because the rights are owned by Channel 4, who are absolutely terrible at showing these kind of shows. They basically pump them out once, they're on all four or whatever their streaming service is now called for about 30 days, and then they vanish forever, and they never bring the old seasons back. So yeah, if you want to watch Harley Quinn in the UK, I think you probably have to digitally rent it from Amazon or some shit. But yeah, if you can get hold of it, it's good.
Yeah, I've wanted to watch it for a long time. Quite a few people I know have recommended it to me, including some people who aren't sort of super into comics things or aren't comics completers in that they watch every adaptation. A lot of people say that, yeah, this is really, really good, pointed me that direction. Yeah, it's just the difficulty of tracking it down that stopped me watching it. Yeah, had it been on Netflix, I'm sure I'd have cannoned through the whole thing at some point, but if it's not on all four, and I don't want to commit a crime, he says, whilst he's been recorded, and download it illegally, so I'm a little bit stumped. But it's interesting that these are at least symbolically connected, if not like actually, direct continuations of the same story.
Well, it's one of those things where, yeah, the events of the cartoon have sort of echoed back into the comic in a similar way to, Harley Quinn originally was created in the 90s Batman cartoon and was then brought into the comics due to her popularity, and her relationship with Poison Ivy has now had a similar trajectory.
Yeah, I guess they're all influencing each other kind of in this sort of ecosystem of superhero stories.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you dig into the Marvel comic line at this point, you can find various things where they've obviously quietly brought aspects of the cinematic universe into the comics because they like them or because they want, movie fans to buy the comics.
A friend of mine who's a big Superman fan was pointing out how various characters that they added in the Smallville TV show into Superman's childhood and youth, they brought in the comics to kind of link that up with present day and make it feel, more of a consistent whole. I can't remember which characters.
I gather that is the case. I too can't remember exactly which one, as I've never seen Smallville and I'm not an avid reader of Superman comics, but that does sound correct.
Yeah, you strongly recommend this Poison Ivy comic?
Yeah, it's good. G. Willow Wilson, very strong writer. This is a very different sort of tone to Ms. Marvel in a lot of ways. It's a lot less bubbly and teen and friendly, but yeah, she's clearly very good and very versatile. Yeah, good comic. Worth a go if you fancy buying it, or if you have the DC Infinite app like I do.
Next up, this episode, we will be discussing The Iron Claw, starring Zac Efron, Jeremy Allen White, Harris Dickinson, and Stanley Simmons, who play the Von Erich brothers, a famous family of professional wrestlers who were active in the 1980s and 1990s. They achieved a lot in their careers under the supervision of their driven father, played by Holt McCallany, but they had lives beset by tragedy. We saw this biopic film recently. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, this is really good. Yeah, it's a really well-made historical biopic. It definitely doesn't require investment in wrestling to follow. Zac Efron especially is great in this, playing this sort of rounded, relatable, kind of lovable, I don't know, I don't want to say idiot, but he's this sort of very passive character who just seems to let life happen to him. He's someone who's very easily influenced by his sort of pushy showbiz dad character, and a lot of his journey in the film is him finally pushing back against his dad. And he's very good at playing this sort of wounded character who's very slowly realising that he needs to, take a hold of his own life. It's good. It's sometimes the sad events that it depicts. I guess, trigger warning, we will at some point have to have some suicide chat in this review, or at least some mention of suicide. But yeah, unfortunately, some of the events of this film are incredibly depressing. Like, don't watch this if you're feeling, sad, because this will only make you sadder. But it does its sadness very well. I'm not sure it quite sails into masterpiece territory for me, for reasons I'll get into later, but I was fully immersed while I was watching it. It's relatively long at nearly 2.5 hours, but I wasn't bored, so yeah, decent film.
Yeah, I enjoyed this film as much as you can enjoy a film that's this sad. I thought it was good, and I would certainly recommend people to go see it. Possibly good but not great is my take. I mean, it's a very sad story and it's good at portraying that, and it's kind of very emotionally engaging. You really identify with the characters, and especially the four brothers, and really buy into their relationship, and the way their relationship with their father is portrayed is very visceral. Like, you can even see how the brothers, how their behavior changes when they're around their father. very much that like he walks into the room, there's just a change in air, there's a change in like how they relate to each other. That's the kind of the family dynamic is brought across really, really well. And as you say, Zac Efron's sort of great as this kind of the older brother, he's kind of this lovable kind of bit of a doofus maybe, but like it's a generally nice guy. I guess my biggest criticism of the film is that it's kind of got like sort of one dynamic that it never really gets past, which is basically like the brothers really love each other and are really supportive, and then the father is kind of very unloving and cold and distant and even cruel. And the sort of positive masculinity of the brothers supporting each other and the kind of toxic masculinity of the father, not showing any love and being very driven is contrasted. And it's interesting to see that, but the film never really, I feel, gets past that. It's always just got the same thing kind of, which is, these brothers really love each other. Their father is really a bit of an arse. I feel that it's kind of gets stuck on that note a bit, but it is, still a powerful story about this family, nonetheless.
Well, I mean, I think as the film goes on, as it gets into its final 40 minutes and has to really start, pushing through the timeline and getting through the events, it does become a bit of a sort of catalogue of tragedy. If it's just sort of, one brother dies, like, spoilers for the actual history of the Von Erich family, I guess. All of the brothers, except for the Zac Efron one, die. And so a brother dies, there's a few minutes to deal with that and build up the next section of the story, and then another one dies. And it does just start to become this sort of list of events, which all unfold, as you say, in a fairly similar way. Like the toxic masculinity of the dad eventually overcomes the positivity that the brothers try to build among themselves. One of the brothers can't cope, and they either take their own life, or I think one of them succumbs to heavily imply that it's drug or steroid abuse that kills the first one.
Yeah, he has a ruptured small intestine, basically, probably through, training too hard, drug abuse, steroid abuse, pushing himself beyond the safe limits because this toxic masculinity has just been driven to be the best, in inverted commas.
It's a tribute to the film's extremely good atmosphere and acting, but, the sad things do still feel sad, even though it does just become a bit of a barrage of sad thing, sad thing, sad thing towards the end. Would it have worked better as a mini-series in which they could spread the events out a bit and give things a bit more space? Or would it have just had the same problem, only spread out over more minutes? I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's quite a lot of plot in this, but because it's kind of following the actual lives of these 5 characters. And making it longer might have just made it drag a bit. It still works on sort of its own terms. It's definitely very accessible if you're not a wrestling fan, as you said. Like, I mean, I've heard of the Von Erichs before, also know as they were a family and they were beset by tragedy. That's kind of what's in the public consciousness. But this film kind of takes you in, gets you invested, in their drive to kind of be the best wrestlers there are. And the other thing that the film does quite well is that because wrestling is more performative than, say, boxing. Things are, planned and scripted in advance. But it does really put the tension into it to show, like, where the kind of competitive nature comes from. That it's about, you have to be able to work a crowd. You have to be able to get people inside, create convincing narrative, get people invested in the character you are in the ring. And that's the competitive skill. The person who's the best at that rises to the top. It gets you invested in that journey as well, which creates a lot of the drama because, for example, the older brother, the Zac Efron character, he's good at wrestling, but he just doesn't have that crowd ability that some of his younger brothers have. And you can see the tension emerging from that. So it does kind of neatly dodge that whole thing of like, isn't it all just scripted? Yeah,
it doesn't really get into the weeds of that. It doesn't really, go into like them planning the matches or exactly how much of it is choreographed. But there's this sense that the part that matters is, putting your character across and acting, I suppose. And then, you get the fun aspects of, some quite good actors playing bad actors or playing actors who are massively overacting.
Yeah, it's always a tricky thing to get right. It's a hard one to do a character doing another character. There's the person they are in the ring and there's the person they are in their family life. And almost all the actors in here are just really kind of embodying their characters. Some of them like pretty much like unrecognizable in the amount of like extra muscle they've put on and kind of with the sort of 80s hairstyles. You really believe in these people as these characters and really believe in the relationship the brothers have for each other.
Yeah, it's good to see Jeremy Allen White taking a break from playing a really driven chef to playing a really driven wrestler.
Yeah, he was a great actor. I mean, he's really, really talented. Yeah, I really hope he continues to have lots of great roles because, it looks like the Bears kind of, catapulted him to international stardom. Now he's probably the best thing in this film, although, Zac Efron's very good.
I think Zac Efron still just about takes it. But Jeremy Allen White does a lot with what actually isn't that many scenes, especially because he doesn't turn up till about nearly an hour into the film.
Yeah, and also the dynamic they have together, obviously, is crucial to it as well. I mean, when we're talking about performances, Holt McCallany as the father. I mean, yeah, he's a difficult person to like. And they don't get behind his skin very much. I would prefer a bit more nuance on the father. I mean, there's a bit at the beginning when it's kind of like, yeah, they're homeless and living in a car in like the 1950s, which kind of sets it up. But then you don't really get much after that. But he is great in the role. Like, yeah, you just tense up as soon as he enters, the frame. Yeah, really good at kind of, yeah, just portraying this real sense of kind of, I don't know, stern, imperious masculinity. There's some great performances in this film.
Yeah, no, he's great. As you say, it's quite a two-dimensional character. I mean, I think it's, I don't know, ultimately, it's a historical biopic. I guess they're stuck on a certain level of, air quotes, reality. If the character was always like that, then he's always like that. I mean, I didn't actually look into any of the history of this before we saw the film, because I thought I might as well go in and be surprised, which did work. I was very much hanging on what would happen next, even though after a while it did become obvious that it was going to be a bit of a bummer from beginning to end. I did look it up a bit afterwards and discover there was actually another brother who wasn't in the film, who also died by suicide, who they left out because it would have just made the film longer and more depressing.
Yeah, I noticed that as well, actually, when I went away and did some research into the Von Erichs for this podcast. Yeah, it's like, man, a whole a whole sixth brother. Because, yeah, there's the fifth one, which they do include, who died when they was very young.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a lot of tragedy. Yeah, and they were all professional wrestlers at one point.
Yeah, I think some of their descendants, their like children and grandchildren, were also professional wrestlers, so didn't put them off entirely.
Yeah, it's a continuing family business. I think some of them are still active today, based on my quick glance at Wikipedia. Yeah, I'm sure people who follow wrestling probably know much more about it. But I guess, as I said, the great strength of the film is that you don't need to know much about wrestling. Yeah, the film presents it on its own terms, just as if this was a movie about musicians in the 18th century. They don't expect you to know what the deal is. It kind of takes you straight in. But yeah, it is a tragic story. I can see why they made the decision to leave out an additional tragic suicide brother.
Yeah,
but it's very sad.
Yeah, no, it's very sad. There was a person behind this in the cinema who clearly also had not done their historical research, and I think, if anything, had turned up expecting a bit more of an inspirational sports movie, and did just keep gasping and exclaiming in shock and outrage when something else horrible happened.
Yeah, that person clearly went on a bit of an emotional roller coaster. I really hope they didn't just look at the poster and see various muscly, shirtless men and think this was another Magic Mike film.
I mean, who knows? Yeah, why not? 80s Magic Mike. There's probably money there.
Yeah, I guess that goes to show that, like, yeah, it really does hit you in the heart, this film. I think because, yeah, it does successfully the kind of the most important basic thing it needs to do, which is it gets you invested in the brothers, their relationship, makes you care about them, and then makes you feel sad when tragedy strikes them.
Yeah, it does do that well, and I think ultimately that's why, yes, it may be not quite a masterpiece, but I think it's still very good. I think there's a good ending, which, despite the endless list of bummers that precedes it, manages to, pull some sort of happiness or vague redemptive hope for the future out of it, which is impressive by itself, and again, pulled off by the actors.
Yeah, I thought that was a good note to end on, rather than just sort of continue a downward slide into kind of tragedy and depressingness. That actually it finds some positivity and hope at the end of it. Yeah, again, the cruelty and toxic masculinity is redeemed through positive masculinity and positive family values at the end, which is, yeah, again, it ends on that kind of uplifting, warm note, which is what you need to, rather than just stagger out of the film just totally emotionally devastated.
But I'm sure that person sitting behind us still did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's a powerful film. Even though, yeah, it just could have benefited from more three-dimensionality. But there's lots of like really nice like sort of nods and gestures and things like that. I like how the film opens with a father, his pregnant wife and two sons, and this isn't so much a spoiler, but yeah, and so the final shot involves a different father with a pregnant wife and two sons, and there's a kind of nice circularness to it, and there's various nods throughout the film kind of create this sense of a whole, which really worked well.
Yeah, and I thought it closed itself off nicely at the end. As you say, I think it could have, I don't know, part of me thinks it could have benefited from more space, but I don't know, I think it does do a decent job of making it seem coherent at its current length. But yeah, as you say, it's a solid 4-star film.
Yeah, if you were going to make it longer, I guess what I'd have done is had more about the father's youth and, when the children were, quite young. It kind of, you have a little bit at the beginning that's about, the father when he was kind of in his prime, so the age the rest of the characters are throughout the film. And most of the brothers haven't been born, or some of them are very young. And then that kind of sets the scene for him, and then it jumps to, all his sons in their 20s, pursuing professional wrestling careers. So, you could have had a flashback plot line building up the father more, contrasting his experience in the 50s to the present. Because obviously his life was very, very hard. And yeah, maybe a bit more dramatizing of that would make him seem like a more relatable character rather than just like this incredibly stern patriarchal figure.
Yeah, I think he is probably the character who gets least well served, but ultimately, I guess it is the brother's story. They're the ones on the poster. And he is this sort of, I think the story is more about the impact he has on them rather than him.
Yeah, it probably actually captures what he was like as a person.
But as you have a lot more minutes, then yes, turning him into an active character with a viewpoint is probably the thing you do, but I can see why they didn't try and do it in this already quite long film.
Yeah, and the mother is an interesting character, I suppose. We've not really talked much about her. Yeah, probably in the background a bit more, along with also, the Lily James playing the love interest for the older brother, providing an interesting, role of the state of women in this very masculine world. It is a film about masculinity and brothers and fathers relating to each other, but the women are put in there as a sort of point of contrast almost. But yeah, one of the most heart-wrenching bits is the way that the mother doesn't protect her own sons from the bullying of the father. So that is, there's that, which is also quite sad and adds to the tragedy of it all.
Yeah, as you say, they are mostly, I guess, representing something rather than getting a lot of characterisation. Although Mauritani and Lily James are both very good and do successfully do quite a lot with the relatively small amount of screen time they have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're both good when they're on screen, and they make these smaller roles feel like real people with full lives.
Yeah, the Lily James character, especially in most of the back end of the film, her job is to kind of try and persuade Zac Efron to maybe spend a bit more time with his family and a bit less time obsessing over his brothers and wrestling. And they do manage to do that without having her come across as a two-dimensional nag. So job done.
Yeah. Overall, I'd definitely watch this, and don't let the fact that if you know nothing about wrestling put you off. But I assume if you do like wrestling, there's also something here because there's a lot of wrestling in this film.
Yeah. Ric Flair was in this film, obviously played by an actor. That's a wrestler I vaguely recognise from the 10 minutes I spent watching wrestling as a child.
Yeah, he's the only wrestler thing I'd heard of before this. Yeah, I guess he's pretty famous. I think he was still active by the time we were kids or in our teens, when the only time I actually watched wrestling on TV.
Yeah, he was in WCW when I was in my late teens. So I saw him do a couple of bouts. And I only watched wrestling for about a month, so that was a very specific window he was in.
Finally, this episode, we will be reviewing Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Based on the film from 2005, this show follows John and Jane, who are assigned to each other as husband and wife as cover for their spy activities. They quickly go from playing partners to being in an actual relationship, although their different ideas about the future and their difficult job gets in the way of their happiness. We've seen the complete first season of this show from Amazon Prime. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I thought this was very enjoyable, even if not quite what I expected. Maybe based on my perception of the original movie, which, full disclosure, obviously I haven't seen. I honestly thought this would be closer to the James Bond Mission Impossible end of the spy spectrum. But honestly, it's more of a character study. The weight here is mostly on Donald Glover and Maya Erskine to give us a portrait of this sort of fake marriage as it deepens and ultimately sort of becomes real in a way that's both well observed and by the end kind of sad. And yeah, they're both very good. It's very easy to watch. It's very interestingly paced in that each episode is kind of just a portrait of a specific moment in their life, which portrays or shows where their relationship is right now, and these sort of build towards the end. Yeah, it's very nicely done. It's more artfully written than it really needed to be. I enjoyed this. Yeah,
I thought this was very good as well. Also, exactly the same response. Not really what I was expecting. I'm led to believe that the original film is much more of a like Hollywood, things exploding, cars being flipped over, things like that. I guess they didn't have that budget. I think also the original film, they're supposed to be assassins, whereas here it's more sort of, more believable spying. If we go back to that spectrum of spy genre from the sillier James Bond to the more grounded, the Americans, things like that. A lot of their assignments are like following people, placing trackers on them, getting information out of them. Although there are, some like car chases and gunfights and things like that. But to be honest, most of the show is quite slight and subtle. It's quite quiet. There's sort of like, there's not a lot of like emotional fireworks or big explosions. There's, quite a lot of like sort of subtly comic scenes when it's just the two people together, and they're sort of slightly, it's based very much on the intricacies of their relationship and the characters, which is, totally not what I was expecting.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, part of that might be catering to the TV budget, but yeah, a lot of the time they keep the spy stuff very brief or quite off-screen, especially the more sort of action-orientated spy stuff. And you're often dealing with them back home or in some other setting, like a therapist's office or something, talking or about what happened or showing how their last spy mission affected them.
Yeah, yeah. And usually how it impacts their relationship.
Yeah.
It's a great sort of study of a couple who work together and, are married and live together, and the pressures that puts on life. They just so happen to be spies as their job, not software programmers, which is what they claim to the outside world. I mean, you could do a show quite similar to this about them working in a stressful tech startup together. It wouldn't be as interesting because there wouldn't be quite so many gunfights, but most of the material of the show would be quite similar.
I think the spycraft aspect of it, the main purpose it plays is to amp everything up and make everything a lot more intense and high octane, which helps, push their relationship to this quite committed heavy point quite quickly and give you, all these intense moments for it to hone in on in quite quick succession.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it ups the stakes. And also, yeah, they can't walk away from this because their lives are literally on the line, and their lives literally depend on each other. It just raises the stakes.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned The Americans, and as I watched all of The Americans last year, it's quite hard not to draw comparisons. I think it does come impressively close to that show for relationship dynamic stuff, but I think it just doesn't get into the practicalities and the spycraft and the nuance of it in as much depth because of this sort of vignettes approach it's chosen to take, which is fine. It's a different way of doing it. If you want a more dense and more detailed version of this show or a similar thing, then go and watch The Americans.
Yeah, I guess what they're aiming with this is kind of the portrayal of a modern, relationship. It's kind of what they're, the modern married life. Yeah, they live in a New York brownstone. I guess it's quite a bougie upper middle class life. But yeah, there's so many kind of parallels to modern coupledom, such as, they meet through work, as a lot of couples do in the 21st century. They're sort of, and they're also kind of assigned through each other by a kind of algorithm type thing, which you could read as a metaphor for online dating or something like that. And then most episodes, although having a spy plot line, usually relate it to some aspect of being a couple. There's one episode when they go on a couple vacation. There's one when they try to make friends with another couple and have couple friends. There's one when they discuss kids. There's one when they're in couples therapy. So yeah, it's kind of, each one is a kind of some aspect of being, a modern married couple.
Yeah, by far the funniest one of those is when they explore the notion of having kids by looking after Von Perlman.
Yeah, so sort of a big grown-up kid.
a massive middle-aged older man baby. Yeah, that's extremely funny.
That was funny. Oh, this one movie just disturbs them when they're in their more intimate moments, shall we say, when he goes I threw up. It's just a giant baby.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think when you've got two performers this charismatic, especially Donald Glover, who is extremely easy to watch, but Maya Erskine's very good in a sort of quiet, intense way as well. You've got to be tempted to not try that hard on the writing and just let them carry it. You could have written a show which is mostly just action and banter, and it would probably still be watchable with these two actors in it. But they have, to be fair, tried a bit harder here. And, one of the co-showrunners is Donald Glover, so fair enough. He himself is not coasting on his own talent.
Yeah, I get the feeling this is very much his vehicle. Although, they are both very good. And they have a really interesting, weird sort of chemistry. It's not sort of like a really showy, clicky chemistry, but they have a sort of I don't know. You can believe in them as a couple because they have this sort of, I don't know, way of bouncing off each other that is totally believable in a sort of quite slight way.
I don't know, it would have been easy to just have them again as this sort of quiet one, loud one, Maya Erskine getting annoyed by Donald Glover dynamic. But again, no, they haven't taken the easy way here. It gets very nuanced and very interesting very quickly.
Yeah, that's the thing. And it's quite a quiet show, very focused on their relationship, and it kind of really builds out also in kind of subtle and so unexpected ways. So the things that arrive, the tensions, such as the Donald Glover character's relationship with his mum and how they have different family dynamics, their different expectations. She likes to read a lot. He feels kind of his intellect is insulted because he's not as booky as she is. Things like that. It kind of builds out the sort of actual believable tensions in a relationship, but they're not straightforward and obvious. One's loud, one's quiet, one likes to party, the other likes to sit in at home and read books. It's not a sort of odd couple sitcom massively mismatched type of thing.
Yeah.
You can kind of see how they have a lot in common and why they, other than the job they share, and why they kind of work as a couple, but also there are these tensions beneath the surface because, they're real people. But also, again, there's another aspect which is sort of true to reality. They're a couple that's met later in life. It's kind of vague about when they're supposed to be, but I guess they're supposed to be in their 30s, perhaps even early 40s. Yeah, they've got as couples you meet later in life, they've got fully formed lives. They're fully adults in their own right with their own tastes and interests and things like that. And obviously that creates, even though they know each other and they know themselves much better being grown-ups, but also that creates conflicts because they're not people who grow together into adults. They're people who meet and then their lives grow together.
Yeah, they're very fully formed, which works quite well in this because it means they can quite quickly form this dynamic. It's quite easy for them to sort of identify the things about them that do and don't match, if that makes any sense. And yeah, as a result, it could just come together quite quickly and they can just go straight into this sort of marriage setup, which they're in by about episode 2 or 3.
Yeah, hits the ground running.
Occasionally, I think its approach to the spy aspects of the show are a bit glib because the writers, want to get back to this marriage, character, relationship stuff, which they're much more interested in. Like, I don't think Mr. and Mrs. Jennings in The Americans would chat loudly and openly about being spies in public places. I just don't think they do it, guys. Which sounds like pedantry from me, and it probably is, to be honest. But when you do such a good job of being an intelligent adult show on one side, it sometimes feels a bit jarring when you skimp a little bit on the other. But ultimately, that's the story they're telling, that's the part they're interested in, and they've only got so much time.
Yeah, I did notice that they, the talking in public places about, top secret stuff and various crimes they've committed, is not so believable. But yeah, I guess they want to make it like, they want to make them look like a couple who argue in public and things like that, or whatever. But yeah, I guess everything's in service of that dynamic. But yeah, there's an interesting parade of guest stars. Yeah, we mentioned Ron Perlman, who turns up, he's very good. John Turturro plays an art collector in one episode. Yeah, there's sort of running thing about Jane likes to collect art. There's another John and Jane who turn up.
At the very beginning, there's one played by, is it Alexander Skarsgård?
Yeah, it just sort of has a brief...
One of those comedy, incredibly brief cameos by someone very famous.
So there's usually a nod in each episode. The therapist is someone who I can't remember, and I'm just trying to...
Is it Sarah Paulson?
Yeah, that's it, yeah. So yeah, and there's Paul Dano playing their neighbour. No characters seem to have names as well. I guess they're obviously they're John and Jane. There's other John, other Jane. There's hot neighbour, the Paul Dano character. So yeah, so they've cast it very well.
Well, yeah, I guess the gimmick that you never know their names is then extended to the rest of the cast.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of little things like that. But yeah, but they certainly they've got a good range of guest stars. Spot the episode character with the famous face is always fun to play.
Yeah, which I think works quite well when there are these sort of one-off vignettes because it means the characters could arrive sort of fully formed and they can just get on with whatever their role is, which is obviously usually to reflect some aspect of John and Jane's marriage back at them.
Yeah, it's interesting that they picked this to go with because as a film to turn into a TV show, it's not particularly well known or well remembered. I think it mainly survives in public consciousness because it was from that time when Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie were a couple, and obviously they were a real life couple playing a film couple in a big aughts glossy confident action movie. And obviously it's a film about a relationship falling apart, and their relationship fell apart in real life, and it's kind of mainly I think remembered on that level. I don't know if there's any Mr. and Mrs. Smith fan base that they're trying to tap into with this. I don't really think there is outside of the fan base of the original stars, but yeah, they kind of more take the original film as sort of a jumping off point to create something new, which is why this works quite well. Although I think it does overall have the same plot trajectory the show does as the film did.
Well, yeah, although we'll see if they do a season 2, I guess. The ending is... I'm not going to spoil it because I don't see any point, but the ending does work quite well as something that could be a final ending or could be followed up on.
Yes, I like the ambiguity of that. It'd be absolutely fine if they just left it there and been it's just this nice one season thing. If they did another season, I guess they'd have to find some other way to expand the couple dynamic, bringing in, other aspects of being a couple to keep this extended metaphor going. I hope that they only do another season if they feel they've got enough good ideas for episodes to do it rather than just doing another season for the sake of it. But we'll have to see. This doesn't seem to have created a huge splash, but almost nothing released on Amazon Prime seems to, apart from The Boys. And Invincible, I guess.
That is true. And I guess Lord of the Rings, though even that seemed relatively low-key considering how expensive it was. Anyway, I'd watch another season of this, if only just to see how they do it. It may well be another show where the first season is really good and then it sort of runs out of steam after that, but hey, first season's still really good.
Yeah, Killing Eve, another couple spy show.
Yep. Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode, why not go to our website at moderatefantasyviolence.com and enjoy all our Moderate Fantasy blog posts, including various end-of-year reviews, Alistair's complete summary of every Mission Impossible film, all that good stuff. Plus, of course, the 200 plus previous episodes. Surely you can't have listened to them all. And yes, if you've enjoyed literally any of that, then why not give us a 5-star review on your podcatcher of choice? Please, please, thank you, please.
You can find more from us on social media. We're now on Blue Sky. So yeah, if you're there, do follow us on Blue Sky. You can search for MFV Podcast and you'll see our purple logo. Follow us there where we'll be chatting to the cool people who've migrated to that platform successfully. We're also still on Twitter, so you can search for MFV Podcast there, or follow us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can follow me on Twitter, where I'm Alistair J.R. Ball, or on Blue Sky, where I'm Alistair J.R. Ball as well, or Instagram or Threads by searching for Alistair Ball. You can also get more from me on my website, which is redtrainblog.com, or find my theatre reviews at Everything Theatre.
And you can find me on the internet at, NickMB on Twitter, nickbryan.com on Instagram, or Nick Bryan on Blue Sky. Hopefully, if you just type Nick Bryan, spelt correctly, into any of the search engines, my little angry red avatar thing should pop up. And you could also, of course, just find me by coming back in 2 weeks for the next episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, in which we will be covering, yes, it's a big fortnight for Alistair, it's the second Dune movie with Timothée Chalamet, and then we will also be covering the second and sadly last season of Our Flag Means Death, now that the BBC iPlayer has finally put it up. Okay, see you next week for that. Bye.
Bye.